When I think of Assumption Church, I think of a day many, many years ago. I might have been 6 or 7. And I went there with my dad. And I said, "Why are you going here?" And he said, "Paul, this is one of the great historic sites of your country." That got my attention. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the first settlement took place during the French regime." And I said, "Where was that?" He said, "It was across the river in Detroit." Gradually they came across, and then ultimately during the British, Assumption Parish was formed, and Assumption Church was built. But then he said to me, "Understand, there are very few parts of your country where the French regime, the British regime, the border between Canada and the United States, the Catholic Church, your church, all came together in the way that this wonderful church is." Later on, I took my own sons, and they came back to Windsor. They were a little older, and I told them that history. And of course, there was a history for them as well, because Sheila and I were married in Assumption Church. And so there's a long connection between my family, the church, the Basilians, and our country. My father's funeral was there. And it was an incredible occasion. And I kept thinking, he loved that church. He loved Assumption Church. I remember asking him one day, because I was taught by the Basilians at St. Mike's in Toronto, "How did the Jesuits get in here?" And my father said, "Don't worry, Paul, there are some good Jesuits." Well, Windsor has a very long and rich history. And everything I've read, by the way, and because I'm very actively involved in the whole question of Indigenous Canada, that the relationships between the Jesuits when they were there as missionaries and between the Basilians and the Hurons was very good. And sometimes when we read our history and we don't read about healthy relationships, it would do us well to remember that there were such healthy relationships. I grew up in Windsor, and you may remember the massive waves of immigrants and refugees who came from Europe. People from every part of Western Europe, Eastern Europe. And they came to Windsor. It was an incredibly rich place to grow up. You could not grow up disliking your fellow man, ignoring what the world was all about. You could not grow up in Windsor at that time understanding that war was a terrible thing, but that people could rise above it and they could build new lives, because that's what they did. Windsor was, in my opinion, the ultimate in modern Canada, because modern Canada came in from so many of those post-World War II refugees and immigrants. And they built churches, they built a society, incredibly rich, and I grew up with that. Those were my friends. And I think that will always be my view of Windsor, and it is now my view of Canada.